welcome back to another video on my channel. If you've been watching my videos on my channel for a little while, then you know that I pretty much always try to avoid topics that are too heavily talked about on the internet. And the reason for that is because I don't really find a problem in watching something or listening to something or even researching something that I've seen a little bit about. But after you see something so many times, it's not even like you're getting new information. It's like it's all just kind of refiltered and put into a different format. And so that was kind of why I was a little bit hesitant to do the video today. However, I've been considering talking about this topic for like a few weeks now. And a couple weeks ago I was considering doing this topic, and then somebody requested for me to cover this topic, and then I figured that was kind of a sign. So if you guys have seen this topic talked about absolutely everywhere, I do apologize, and I hope that I can bring some new information into the light for you, or at least just refresh your memory a little bit. But with that all being said, let's get into today's case. So today we are going to be talking about the case that involves the hijacking of an airplane by a man who goes under the name D.B. Cooper. And this case is again very, very popular. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have heard about this case at least somewhere a little bit before, because this is the only hijacking in America that ever took place that has not been solved. This all started on November 24th, 1971, when a man going by the name of Dan Cooper walked into an airport and purchased a plane ticket for $20. He was flying to Seattle, and the flight should have only been about 30 minutes, but of course nobody was expecting what happened on the plane next to have taken place, and that definitely delayed the time of the flight. This man going by the name Dan Cooper appeared to be in his early to late 40s, but he definitely looked like he was in his 40s. He had dark hair, brown eyes. He was seen wearing an overcoat, and underneath it he was wearing a work suit. He had on a white shirt, a black tie, and brown shoes. Along with all of this, while getting on the plane, he was carrying with him a briefcase and a small paper bag. Another thing to note about this Dan Cooper fella is that he had a low-toned voice, so it was pretty deep. However, there was no significant signs of any accents or anything like that. Dan Cooper had gotten on flight 305 and was sitting in the seat numbered 108. Once the plane took off, that is when he passed a note to the nearest flight attendant to him, who was a woman by the name of Florence Schaefer. He passed her this note, but Florence didn't think anything of it, and she put the note in her pocket and then kind of was going about her business doing her job, when she was then again stopped by this Dan Cooper fella, and he said to her, "Miss, you better read that note that I just gave you because I have a bomb." Obviously, after saying this, he had Florence's undivided attention. He then asked her to sit beside him, which she did immediately, and after she did this, she asked him how she would know for sure that he was traveling with a bomb, and that is when he flashed her the contents of his bag, and there was definitely a bomb within this bag. There was a bunch of cylinders and wires and things like that that just kind of proved that he was in fact traveling with a bomb in his bag. Once she sat down beside him, he told her to write down everything that he was saying and then to take it to the captain. He told her that he wanted $200,000 delivered to him all in $20 bills, and he wanted this to be done by 5 p.m. He wanted all of the money to be put in a backpack, and he wanted to have 4 parachutes delivered to him, 2 for the front and 2 for the back. On top of that, he wanted a fuel truck to meet them at the airport in Seattle so that they could refuel the plane so that they could fly from the Seattle airport to wherever he was headed. The captain of the plane was informed of these demands, and so he contacted the air control, and they contacted federal authorities. And the people who were working on the plane were just kind of told to go along with whatever this man by the name of D.B. Cooper demanded. They just wanted to keep things as smooth as possible, so he would be getting his money, and everybody was just told to cooperate with him. Like I said, this hijacking really affected the time of the plane, although I don't think that was everybody's biggest worry at that time. But after all of these demands were made, the plane flew around Seattle for 2 hours while the authorities tried to figure out a way to get this man his money and get all of the passengers off of the plane safely. So they circled around Seattle again for 2 hours while figuring this out, and the entire time, the man who was going by the name of Dan Cooper just seemed to be very calm. He didn't seem panicked at all. He was completely relaxed and chilled out while this was all going on. Just think is important to note here is that while the plane was flying over Seattle, the man who was going by the name of D.B. Cooper seemed to have had a lot of knowledge of his surroundings on the ground, meaning that from the plane he could identify things that he knew were on the ground, which obviously, I might not be explaining this very good, but obviously a person who's not familiar with being in a plane and identifying things from the air wouldn't know how to identify things that are on the ground. So it kind of seemed like he was very familiar with not only Seattle, but being above Seattle. Once the 2 hours had passed, finally they figured out how to meet this man's demands, and they were able to safely land the plane. The passengers on the plane were exchanged for money, fuel for the plane, and the parachutes that D.B. Cooper had requested. During this time, all of the windows had been closed so that they couldn't shoot him or do anything like that to kind of blindside him. And after that, again, they were successfully exchanged for the passengers who were on the plane, for all of the things that D.B. Cooper had requested. Once they took off again, this time they were headed towards New Mexico, and Dan Cooper just told the person who was flying the plane to stay below 10,000 feet. This isn't a real key part in this investigation, however, I just personally thought that it was very, very interesting. After the plane had taken off from Seattle that had D.B. Cooper in it, 5 military-grade planes followed this airplane, and not one single person who was on these military planes saw D.B. Cooper jump from the plane that he was on. And they were all pretty close to his plane. I mean, they were trying to figure out a way how to get this guy off the plane and get back the money and everything that they had given him and put him in jail, obviously, but they were not able to even see the man jump off the plane, which is just absolutely crazy. So during the next part of this plane, that is when the man D.B. Cooper put on these very dark, black, skinny looking sunglasses. And the reason that I mention that is not because that is some very important part of this case, but because all of the crew members who had last seen D.B. Cooper described him as wearing these dark sunglasses. So a lot of the sketches that are done of the suspect and whatnot do have on these very dark sunglasses, although some don't, but a lot of the famous ones do. So I just wanted to mention that here. After the plane had taken off for the second time, now headed towards Mexico City, D.B. Cooper told all of the members of staff who were still on the airplane to go put themselves in the cockpit and to just stay in there. He didn't want them out, he didn't want them around him, so they were all in the cockpit and he was in the main part of the airplane. And a little after 8 p.m., that is when D.B. Cooper jumped from the plane, and this was between Mexico City and Reno, Nevada. Now, what is so strange about all of this to me and really stood out is that D.B. Cooper did not pick the path that the plane took. The only thing that he picked was the end goal, which was that they would get to Mexico City. But the person who was flying the plane, the pilot, was the one who had picked the path that the plane would be taking. So D.B. Cooper couldn't have had any idea that they would be flying over this exact spot because he did not pick the route that they took. The pilot did, and the pilot did confirm this several times. The crew members who remained on the airplane, who were now in the cockpit, became aware that D.B. Cooper had jumped out the back door of the plane when a little light went off, signaling to them that the back door had been opened. And then they successfully landed the plane in the Reno, Nevada airport. And once the plane was landed, it was surrounded by FBI agents, authorities of all kinds, people with guns, this, that, and the other. But when they searched the plane, that is when they found that obviously D.B. Cooper was nowhere to be found. He was no longer on this plane, and the only thing that he left behind were 2 of the parachutes that he had requested, along with a clip-on black tie that he must have taken off before he jumped out of the plane. And this is when an investigation to who exactly this man D.B. Cooper was. And when they were investigating the airplane, they noticed 66 unidentified fingerprints on the plane. Whether they were all from D.B. Cooper or other passengers who had been on the plane before they had kind of done the exchange is kind of unknown. But obviously there was a very large interest also at that time in $20 bills because the man D.B. Cooper had requested all of his money be paid to him in $20 bills. What makes things even stranger is none of those $20 bills would show up for 9 years. But 9 years after this had taken place in 1980, that is when they would see some of the $20 bills that had definitely been given to D.B. Cooper. The way that this money was found is pretty crazy. A very young boy, I believe he was like 7, maybe even younger, was at the beach with his father in Tino Bar, just having a fire and hanging out, when the boy decided to kind of adventure away, and that is when he came across what appeared to be a rotting paper bag. When he opened up this paper bag, he found a bunch of $20 bills in the bag, and there was about $5,800 within this package. However, once they brought this into police, because the dad was like, we can't keep this money, we don't know where it came from, that is when they found that the serial numbers that was on this money matched the serial numbers of some of the cash that was given to the hijacker, D.B. Cooper. Obviously, with this being the only real thing that ever came out of this case, a lot of people speculated that maybe D.B. Cooper had dropped the money by accident while he was making his escape from the plane, and that is how it had gotten there, but that's really the only theory of how the money had gotten there. And nothing really ever came from finding this money. They never tracked down D.B. Cooper. They never were able to figure anything else out at this point. This in the year 1972, several newspaper companies as well as news anchors and TV channels and things along those lines started to receive letters from people who claimed to have been D.B. Cooper, claimed to have been friends with D.B. Cooper, claimed to have been related to D.B. Cooper, lots of people claiming to be his brother. However, again, nothing came out of any of this, and these are strongly believed to have all been hoaxes. Authorities reenacted D.B. Cooper's jump several times in hopes that by doing this they would be able to determine where exactly D.B. Cooper had landed, and they were able to determine where it was after doing this several times, and that was that he landed in Mount St. Helen near Lake Merwin. So they kind of were able to kind of focus all of their attention on that area, but even searching that area didn't turn up anything. They didn't find absolutely anything leading them to believe that D.B. Cooper was ever even there. Another little funny fact that I wanted to throw in here is nobody is actually sure why this man has been dubbed D.B. Cooper, because the name that he gave while he was getting onto the plane was just Dan Cooper, but the computer kind of messed up a little bit and somehow put a B in there, and people kind of rolled with it, and that is why he is dubbed D.B. Cooper. He never gave a B, and his name was just Dan. So I just thought that was a little bit interesting and kind of funny how he kind of got his name by a computer mess up rather than what he had actually said. The original charge against D.B. Cooper was to be air piracy, but that had a 5-year statute of limitations, and so they changed this to violating the Hobbs Act. This basically means that no matter what, if this man is ever caught and ever identified, he will be charged and have to serve time for his crimes, whether that be 10 years, 30 years, 40 years, whenever it is after this crime was committed, he will have to serve time for that crime. So now we are going to talk about some of the suspects in this case. Now, there was originally, I believe, like 800 people, something like that, who were suspected of being D.B. Cooper. However, after investigating all of those people, the investigators were able to shorten this list to only 25. However, 25 still is a very large number, so I will not be covering every single person who is a suspect in this case, but I will be covering some of them for you guys right now. The first person that I want to talk about in this case is a man by the name of Jack Cofield. Now, this was the first person ever to have claimed to have been D.B. Cooper. Jack did have a criminal record, however, his crimes were not hijacking and things along those lines. His crimes were mainly just conning people out of money. So, from conning people out of money to hijacking an airplane, obviously that's a very big jump, but he claimed that he was D.B. Cooper. However, there was a lot of inconsistencies with his story, and eventually police were able to clear him as a suspect because his stories weren't lining up and he honestly couldn't get his lies straight. So they were kind of all over the place, and that is why they were able to clear him as a suspect. A theory that is widely speculated in this case, and a theory that I personally believe, is that the man dubbing himself D.B. Cooper was somehow involved in either the Air Force or he was very familiar with flying airplanes, whether that be commercially or for the government or for the military. He somehow had some knowledge about flying planes. The reason that this is believed is, again, because he knew how Seattle looked from the sky enough to be able to identify that a normal person who does not fly a plane like me would not be able to identify below him. It just kind of confirms that he definitely had some experience in an airplane where he would be identifying things below him. But going hand in hand with this theory, a lot of people also don't believe that this D.B. Cooper man is a bad guy. They think that he possibly just fell on very, very bad financial trouble, and he didn't really have any other choice but to pull off something like this. The next person that we are going to talk about who was a suspect in this case is a man by the name of Kenneth Christensen. This person is actually somebody that I could see having the knowledge to be able to have pulled this off, because he was a paratrooper, a mechanic, and a flight attendant for the Orient Airlines, which was the airline company that D.B. Cooper had targeted. Kenneth Christensen didn't become a suspect in this case until 2003, and I don't even believe then he was too heavily focused on. However, by that time he had already passed away. But his brother had been watching a documentary about the D.B. Cooper hijacking, and that is when he became completely convinced that Kenneth was D.B. Cooper. He said that the two had striking similarities in their appearance, and that shortly after the hijacking had taken place, his brother Kenneth had bought a house completely in cash. He brought this information to the FBI, however, they didn't seem too interested in this. They didn't think there was a lot of back to it, so they didn't really look into it too much. However, a few years after these claims were made, that is when it came out that Kenneth actually did not pay for that house in cash that his brother had thought that he did. The next suspect that I'm going to be talking about is one that I'm sure you've heard of if you are very into the D.B. Cooper case, and this is the suspect that I personally feel like could most likely be responsible for this hijacking. And this is a man by the name of Richard Floyd McCoy. And what is so interesting about this man is that he was a hijacker. This man was arrested in April of 1972, 5 months after the D.B. Cooper hijacking, and he was arrested for hijacking a plane. There was a lot of similarities between McCoy's hijacking as well as Cooper's hijacking. One of these being that they both jumped out of a Boeing 727, which is the type of plane. They both requested 4 parachutes. They both seemed very calm while this entire thing was taking place. They both wrote letters, and on the bottom of the letters they signed it with "no funny business." There was just a lot of striking similarities between D.B. Cooper's hijacking and the hijacking that was taken out by Richard McCoy. Richard McCoy, however, did end up escaping prison and was eventually killed in a shootout with police. But he does seem to be the main suspect in this case for many, many people. Not only authorities who have really looked into him, but people who are very interested in this case often think that Richard McCoy is the best suspect for this case. Another kind of like funny theory that people have in this case is that D.B. Cooper could have just been an adrenaline junkie who wanted to prove that not only could he do this, but he could do this, get away with it, and that it could in fact be done. Because again, there had been no hijackings in America that had taken place that hadn't been solved in that time, and to this day, this is the only hijacking that ever took place in America where the hijacker has not been caught. Now, I don't think that this theory has too much back to it. However, if that is the case, the person did do it very successfully, and he still hasn't been caught to this day. I'm going to talk about 2 more suspects in this case and then call it a day, but the next person that I'm going to be talking about is a woman by the name of Barbara Dayton. Barbara Dayton had claimed to her friends that she had hijacked an airplane. Now, something that is important here is that Barbara had a sex change. She was previously Robert, but she had a sex change and changed her name to Barbara. She claimed that she'd hijacked this airplane before getting the sex change, so as a man, and then she avoided being caught because she had turned into a woman. So that is kind of how she explained away being identified. And after this all came to light, one of her friends had written a book about her confession to him, and it is called The Legend of D.B. Cooper, Death by Natural Causes, and it was released in 2002. However, the FBI never took Barbara's case too seriously, and they never really looked into her too much. The last person that I'm going to talk about in this case is a man by the name of Walter Reca. Now, Walter Reca, similar to Barbara, had confessed this crime to a friend. He said that he was a spy and that he had hijacked an airplane going under the name D.B. Cooper. Walter had allegedly recorded a confession for his friend, and once he had passed away, the friend kind of took this confession to the FBI. Unfortunately, it is not known if any king ever came out of Walter Reca or if they eliminated him as a suspect or anything like that, but his friend did end up also writing a book about his encounter, and this book is called D.B. Cooper and Me. A Criminal, a Spy, My Best Friend. Just another fun fact to add into the case here is that the name Dan Cooper was believed to have been taken from a comic book series from Belgium in the 70s. It had a hero in the comic book, and the hero's name was Dan Cooper, and there have been no real translations released of this book, so they wouldn't be in America. However, there were a few of them in Canada, so it was believed that either this man was very familiar with traveling in Europe, or he was some kind of native Canadian type person who could speak 2 languages, although it is again said that he did not have an accent while he was on the plane. But to this day, the man going by the name of D.B. Cooper has never been caught. There is not one solid suspect in this case, and to be honest, I don't think this case is ever going to be solved. And I don't know if I personally feel that bad about it. I mean, obviously what he did was a crime and it is bad, but nobody was hurt in what he did. So I really don't feel any kind of longing for him to be identified, although that would be really cool and it would kind of give us answers to all of these questions that we do have about this case. However, I personally just don't think that this is one that will ever be solved. But guys, that brings us to the end of this video. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to comment down below what you'd like to see in my future videos. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.